Erik Erikson's theory on psychosocial development consists of 8 developmental stages. A person progresses through these stages throughout their lifetime. As the person moves through these stages, they will deal with a variety of developmental tasks and crises unique to the specific stage that they are in. In this presentation, I will use information from an interview I conducted with a client. My client is a 68-year-old, middle-class Caucasian male from the northeastern part of the United States, and I will focus on Erikson's developmental stage number 7, generativity versus stagnation, adulthood. My client has provided me with a written consent form for the participation in this interview. To protect his privacy, I will refer to him as my male client. Stage 7 of the psychosocial development typically happens during the ages of 40 to 65. During this time, adults strive to create or nurture things that will outlast them. Often they do this by parenting children or contributing to positive changes that will benefit others. Contributing to society and doing things to benefit future generations are important aspects of this developmental stage. The word generativity refers to a person's concern for others and their need to nurture and guide younger people and to contribute to the next generation. Unresolved crises in this stage can result in stagnation in development. Stagnation refers to the inability to be productive for the sake of others. This will make it difficult for a person to successfully move into the final stage, stage 8. Some important experiences in my interview's life during this developmental stage. The first is his wife's illness. My client fell in love and married a woman with cystic fibrosis when he was 26 years old. Her illness became a central part of his development from that time moving forward. My client described his wife as being full of life, and although she had many good days, there were also many difficult days for them. She was often bedridden or hospitalized, which made it difficult for her to work and assist in supporting their family. My client and his spouse desperately wanted to have a family of their own. However, due to her illness, they were unable to conceive children. They decided to begin the long and difficult process of adoption. After many years and many disappointments, they were able to adopt a young infant girl and then later on an infant boy. In order to support his family, my client had to take on multiple jobs. At the age of 40, my client began working full-time as a teacher as well as part-time at a convenience store in the evening to help pay for their medical bills and to support his family. All the while, he was still the primary caregiver to his children and his wife, leaving him very little time for himself. My client also had a very close relationship with his father. Unfortunately, his father suffered from a massive heart attack, and my client had to care for him. This left him even less time for himself. Next, his relationship with his mother. His mother had a very difficult time accepting his marriage. As a result, the two became estranged and no longer speak. Lastly, in 2002, when my client was 51 years old, he lost his wife to cystic fibrosis. At the same time his children had left for college, this left him alone. Some of the challenges and accomplishments of this developmental stage. Once again, one of the biggest challenges of this stage was his wife's illness and her death. It was very difficult for him to watch the person he loved deal with this illness. He felt a lot of guilt and worry about the effect that her illness had on raising his children. He can recall multiple times asking his children to be more quiet because their mother was sleeping. And he can remember times when they'd run to her after school and lay in bed with her just to keep her company. Her death was extremely difficult and isolating for him. He felt like people expected it to not be as difficult because it was anticipated due to her illness. However, he said he never went about feeling like it was expected. He described her illness and life expectancy as that of any other. He said a person never really focuses on the fact that any of us could die at any point. Rather, we choose to focus on the life we have currently. Next, his relationship with his mother. Again, this was very difficult for him. It left him feeling very angry and resentful towards her, and it was something he dealt with regularly. On a number of occasions, his mother reached out to him to try to repair the relationship. He was unable or unwilling to repair the relationship. Lastly, for 25 years, his primary role was a caregiver to his spouse, his children, his father, and his students. He did not know his identity as anything else. When his wife passed away and his children went off to school, as a way of coping with his loss, he made new relationships in which he could act as the caregiver. He felt he was unable to remove himself from this role. He felt he had no other identity. Next, the accomplishments of this developmental stage. He felt very proud of his happy marriage and his children. He said he never regretted the choices he made. He was a successful school teacher. He was part of a church and religion that he was passionate about. His community and family supported him, and he was very proud of the birth of his grandchild. Part of this developmental stage was a psychosocial crisis, which was the death of his spouse and the loss of his children when they left for college. Some of the unresolved portions of this crisis came from unresolved issues of Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Some of the aspects of that facilitated the resolution of this crisis were raising his children as a later, older father. Many studies have been conducted that indicate that generativity is commonly considered in relationship to parenthood. Studies have shown that men who become parents at a later age are more likely to be classified as highly involved parents with a more positive paternal effect on their children. They are also more likely to score higher on a satisfaction of life scale. Another aspect that helped facilitate resolution of this crisis was his religion. Also, his community and family support. Some things that inhibited the resolution of his crisis. The unsuccessful completion of Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. A key developmental task of Stage 6 is the ability to learn how to give and take with a significant other without sacrificing your personal identity. My client became a caretaker at a young age, first as a teacher, then to his wife, throughout her illness, next to his father, and finally to his children. He spent his young adulthood and his adulthood caring for others and their needs, never having time to maintain and tend to his own personal identity, which was separate from others. When assessing my client's development in this stage, we can first analyze his psychological level. There are two main aspects in his development that have been impacted by this developmental crisis. The first is his cognitive and emotional development. During young adulthood and through adulthood, he took on the role of primary caregiver in his family. He worked many hours and cared for many people, leaving very little time for himself. In Rogers' text, we learn that without prevention, cognitive and emotional development can become hindered. This leaves some young adults with a difficult time maintaining a stable sense of self-identity, and they may have difficulty with healthy boundaries and relationship skills. The problems, if left unresolved, will follow them through to middle and late adulthood. The second aspect to look at is mental health. After the death of his wife, my client became very depressed. He felt he was unable to cope with the loss and was unable to deal with his emotion. For the first time in a long time, he needed to learn about his own identity. He describes this time as extremely lonely and a very difficult path of personal growth. Researchers James Marcia and Ruth Allen Josselson argue that Erikson's psychosocial developmental theory is necessary for clinical assessment and therapeutic intervention. It affords a way of locating people on their developmental trajectory and understanding their symptoms or life difficulties as reflecting blockages in their growth. My client's inability to maintain his own identity in young adulthood has made it difficult for him to resolve his developmental crisis in Stage 7. On a biological level, a symptom of his depression was unhealthy eating habits, smoking, and obesity. He developed health issues, and at the age of 60, he suffered a severe heart attack and had to undergo a double bypass. He also has a family history of heart disease. And on a social level, his lack of relationship with his mother is very stressful. Issues of diversity and difference in this developmental stage. During the interview, when asked if he felt like any of the experiences in his development and growth were affected by diversities or differences, my client initially said no. He stated that he grew up in a very small town with very little diversity. Nearly the entire population of his town was made up of white Catholic middle-class people, including himself and his family. He did mention, however, his frustrations about the healthcare system in dealing with his wife's illness. She was not covered well under this policy because of her terminal illness. On a macro level, he felt they were discriminated against because of a pre-existing medical condition. Prior to the passage of President Obama's Patient Protection and Affordable Care of 2010, once a child reaches young adulthood, they may be dropped from a medical policy. Oftentimes, it is difficult for a person with a pre-existing condition to find a new policy with adequate coverage. In a sense, when looking at the definition of oppression, which as defined in Rogers is the social act of placing severe restrictions on an individual or group, terminal illness can be defined as oppressive. It can be oppressive to the person suffering from the illness as well as to their family. When looking at this developmental stage from a multi-system lens, we can see aspects of it that helped and hindered his growth. Some of the ways in which his systems around him helped were his family and community. He had continued support in a relationship with his spouse's family after the death of his wife. His community also gathered together to bring meals to him, cleaning care for his home, and to provide company and support to him. He also had his church. He was a member of the Catholic Church his entire life. He had a strong sense of faith and spirituality, and his church helped and provided resources for him to dealing with his grief. Next, what hindered him? The larger social policy, his health care at a macro level, made him feel discriminated against. It was difficult for him to lose his wife, and the situation was made harder and more stressful by the lack of adequate health care. He had to work more and spend less time with his family in order to help cover their policy.